The Ongoing Feud of Shiites and Sunnis, Its Toll on Iraq by Emily Hixon. For one to understand the depth of why the country of Iraq stands today on a weakened foundation, one must first venture to the past and see what key factors played in its construction. The Islamic faith is split into two major denominations, the Sunnis and Shiites. The development of mistrust between the Sunnis and Shiites began 1400 years ago after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. The two groups were created after there began a separation amongst the Muslim population and how the Islamic faith should be ruled. This concept was important due to the fact that Islam was not just a private religion, it also had great influence socially and politically. The followers of the way, also known as the Sunni Muslims, believed anyone with the qualifications should be eligible to rule. However, others believed the position should be left to a family member of Muhammad, and this group was referred to as the Party of Eli, also known as the Shiite Muslims. Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's father-in-law and close friend, was believed to be the rightful successor. However, others disagreed and believed it should be Ali, Muhammad's cousin. Eventually, Abu Bakr was named the successor to Muhammad. However, this caused much tension amongst the Muslim population at the time. Charles Igbenindu, writer for the Nigerian News, explains that, although the divide was at first mostly political, as the minority group was a faction supporting the power of Ali, over time, the divide evolved into a religious movement. Eventually, Ali was chosen as the fourth caliph, but now violent conflict broke out. Two of the earliest caliphs were murdered. War erupted when Ali became caliph, and he too was killed in fighting in the year 661 near the town of Kufa, now in present-day Iraq. The violence and war split the small community of Muslims into two branches that would never reunite. This division amongst the Islamic faith may be an ancient dispute, but it still weighs heavy on the Arab world. Now, how large is the Muslim faith? Well, in a demographic study conducted by the Pew Research Center, it is believed there's approximately 1.57 billion Muslims worldwide. The Pew Research Center states of the total Muslim population, 10 to 13% are Shia Muslims, and 87 to 90% are Sunni Muslims. Most Shiites, between 68% and 80%, live in just four countries: Iran, Pakistan, India, and Iraq. Now, this brings us to the question how the tension amongst the Islamic faith has grown. IMB writer for the Northern African and Middle Eastern peoples, Madeline Arthington, articulates to the audience the divide amongst the Islamic faith and explains in the following sentence about how such a split is dangerous to the Arab community. Sunni Muslims find the Shiite obsession of the House of Muhammad to be a false Islam. Likewise, Shiite Muslims feel Sunnis are not the true Muslims. Their sharp disagreements, unreconciled for centuries, result in a fractured Middle East and perpetually unresolved tension. It is this ancient dispute over the successor of Muhammad that has torn the Islamic faith apart and has prevented it from functioning as a whole. Many articles have been presented on the topic of the Islamic faith, have all agreed that such a split has caused the development of such intense discrimination amongst both groups. Not to mention that their leaders also often seem to be in competition, ranging from Lebanon and Syria to Iraq and Pakistan, which resulted in an emphasized sectarian divide, says the BBC. How can a religion function fully when there is separation amongst its believers? With such a large sectarian divide amongst the Islamic faith, it is not surprising that much discrimination between the two groups has arose. It ranges from communities of the Islamic faith being persecuted for their association with either the Sunnis or Shiites, all the way to terrorist organizations evolving from the ancient dispute, with one of the most famous being that of ISIS. In an article by BBC, an example of how discrimination between the two groups exists is presented and states, in countries which have been governed by Sunnis, Shiites tend to make up the poorest sections of society. They often see themselves as victims of discrimination and oppression. Sunni extremists frequently denounce Shiites as heretics who should be killed. Such oppression can be seen vice versa, where the majority is ruled by Shiites and the minority being that of Sunnis, find themselves in the poorest sections of society. With the development of extremists from both sectors finding their way to set forth oppression, it is not surprising that the Islamic faith and the Arab world as a whole suffers. It is agreed that ISIS evolved from Al-Qaeda and that the leader, Abu Musab al-Zawahiri, had a dark vision in which he yearned to fuel civil war between Sunnis and Shiites and establish a caliphate. Although he was killed in 2006, his vision was realized in 2014, the year ISIS overran northern Iraq and eastern Syria. If this ancient feud continues to cause a separation amongst the Islamic faith, then the Arab world and the religion itself will continue to suffer in a deadly manner. Now, why does Iraq suffer in this context of the split amongst the Islamic faith? Well, we must first venture back to a time when the country was ruled by the dictator Saddam Hussein. From the Encyclopedia Britannica, it explains that Saddam Hussein was originally a member of the Ba'ath Party that took control over Iraq in 1968, and then he was able to hold power with the head of state until 1979 when he took the presidency. From there, Saddam ruled with an iron fist and became well known for being a tyrant that played the political game in a deadly manner. Saddam purged out members of the Ba'athist Party that he suspected of conspiring against him when he took presidency by having members of the party execute others that were suspected of foul play. In an article by Yosef Abdullah, a lecturer of politics, he explains this violent incident in the following sentence. The purge shaped Saddam's image as a ruthless dictator who would not tolerate any form of deceit. He soon instilled a climate of fear and perpetuated torture, kidnapping, and mass murder, as well as crimes against humanity. Saddam himself was a Sunni and ensured a violent manner to continue the feud and discrimination of the Shiites that he ruled over. A majority of Iraq Arabs are Shiites, but Sunnis ran the show when Saddam Hussein, himself Sunni, ruled Iraq. Saddam spread a false belief, still surprisingly persistent in the country today, that Sunnis were the rural majority in Iraq, explained Zachary Buenkamp, writer for the Vox, about the tough conditions the Shiites endured under the rule of Saddam. Iraq's population is predominantly Shiite. However, when it comes to political power, the country is mostly ruled by Sunnis, which leaves the Shiites powerless when it comes to the conditions they endured. It is known that Saddam would kidnap and torture many Shiites during his reign, and he ensured that they lived in the poorest sections of Iraq. And it is explained that in an article by Smithsonian Magazine how all Shiites in Iraq have their common bond in a memory of discrimination, whether in the form of mass executions during the reign of Saddam Hussein or simply an exclusion from power through Iraq's history. This mistreatment and constant discrimination amongst the population would lead to now an unstable Iraq that follows sectarian rule. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime, the Shiites and Sunnis still struggle to find peace with one another, with most feeling a strong distrust amongst the population. After Saddam lost power in 2003, a civil war broke out amongst Iraq, and the Shiites coming out top dog. With a flip in roles, it is not surprising that the emergence of extremist groups appeared soon after the fall of Saddam, ranging from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. It is explained by Buenkamp of Vox that so long as Shiites control the government, the Sunnis don't feel that they're fairly represented. ISIS has an audience for its radical Sunni message. That's an important part of how the group built up supporting Iraq's heavily Sunni northwest. As long as the government is run by a majority of Shiites, ISIS has a crowd to recruit due to the unfair representation in government. Many Iraqis were under the impression that with the fall of Saddam Hussein, they would experience freedom comparable to the westernized world, but this unfortunately was not the truth. One Iraqi responded to the concept of the fall of Saddam by stating, "I had first thought that Saddam gone and the Americans in charge, the new Iraq would be orderly, liberal, and secular. We thought we would breathe freedom. We would be like Europe. It is unfortunate that the dislike between the two groups grows so deep that they are unable to see past the differences and work together to create a stable Iraq."